Hey, Michael, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Well, it's great to be here. I'm doing very well. It's a sunny day in Nova Scotia, and it's going very well.
Sunny day in Nova Scotia. So you are in Canada.
I am in Canada. I started off life in the USA, but I am now living in Canada, have been for a long time, and on the very East Coast.
I believe it's quite beautiful there. So I spoke to your colleague
It is.
Christina last week. Fabulous conversation, very insightful young woman.
Mhm.
I thought that we could follow up from the discussion we had with her, but to start, maybe talk the listeners through your background and how you ended up researching burnout.
Okay, well, it's an odd trail, but in most every trail that we take in life is always somewhat unique and interesting. I started off actually my degree in university from University of Oregon, where I got my psychology degree, was really in clinical psychology, working on family therapy, and I thought that that was a fascinating thing in terms of social entities and how what was really interesting there
Yes.
was with the things that were going on between people. Rather, I was much more interested in what you could see happening between people than trying to figure out what was going on beneath the surface, like right there. And soon after I came to the Acadia University in Nova Scotia, Canada, as an academic job, uh, I was working with a residential mental health facility in the area and started getting interested in and was actually being involved in some conversations about some difficulties different parts of the people working at the hospital were having with other people working at the hospital, and sort of some tensions among members of work groups, and that the tensions among people were, actually driving some people to resign or even leave their field of psychiatry or psychology altogether. And I was, working with people to see, are there ways that we could help address some of the tensions that were bothering people in this way. And this was way back when, and I read Christina Maslach and Susan Jackson's first article on burnout at that time. And I thought, this is really interesting stuff. This is capturing something quite important. And so I had a sabbatical year coming up at the university. So I just, as one did back in the olden days, I
Mhm.
picked up a telephone and phoned Christina Maslach out of the blue and said, "Hi, you don't know me, but I'd like to come work with you for a year on this issue of burnout and understanding it." And she said, "Okay, I have an office here you can use at the University of California in Berkeley." So I got in my car and we drove across the North America to California and spent a year working with Christina on this. And we wrote our first article together that year, and I've found it to be an endlessly interesting topic to follow ever since then.
And how many years ago was this? When did you do that sabbatical working with Christina in California?
1984.
Wow, when they make a movie about your life, there's going to be a road trip scene of you going all the way from Canada to California. Make an interesting
That's
movie
it. And a green Volvo.
in a green Volvo. I can imagine Brad Pitt driving a green Volvo playing you. It'll be quite a good movie.
There you go. Oh,
So,
clearly that's who you'd have to depict me. Yeah.
so as a start for the listeners, how do you and Christina define burnout? Because I think people have different definitions of the concept.
Well, our definition, it follows how it's measured with the Maslach burnout inventory. And it also, which the definition that the World Health Organization has posted as its, accepted definition of what is burnout, is this three-part syndrome of a combination of exhaustion, really chronic exhaustion just really before the day even begins, exhaustion. That combined with a psychological distancing, which could be depersonalization or just a sense of cynicism about the work that you do, and
Yes.
combined as well with a low sense of accomplishment, really discouragement at the same time. So that combination of those three things is what we focused on as burnout.
How did you figure out that burnout was being caused between a mismatch between what people wanted to do and what they were doing? Because I haven't seen that definition for burnout before. How did you zoom in on that? What was the research behind it?
Well, the research on it basically, we started off looking. This was, I guess, in the 1990s when we were writing a book together called The Truth About Burnout in the mid 1990s, early 1990s. And we were looking at, well, what was the research identifying as the main correlates of job burnout, of the pieces of it. And it was this idea of these. It was really the areas of work life. When we looked at stuff about personality or attitudes, whatever, the
Yes.
relationships were fairly fuzzy at that point. But what was strong was that problems with workload, problems with control, being able to make decisions about your work, relationships with other people, the reward, that basically it was and so we're looking at this, that these are the things, and they're really part of the work environment. They're the management systems. They're the
Yes.
what's going on when people go at work. That's where the problem was. And so you go, okay, are these just bad places that are damaging people? But then we would look at our surveys and see, well, most people are doing okay. Like if I feel there's some people who are really having difficulties in these
Yes.
environments, but actually, a lot of people are doing fine. They say that's just a job. Well, it's demanding, but it's a job. I'm not having a problem here. And so then we thought, okay, it's this intersection then. Some people are looking for something from that job that it's not providing, that there is a mismatch between the person. Because for some people, it's working. They're going,
Yes.
okay, this is basically what I was looking for in the job. And they're going along and it's quite functional. But for some people, it's not working. That's where we thought you got to look at how they come together. And that's back to my thing about what's interesting to me is that what's going on between people between people and their work environments. That intersection is
Yes.
where the interesting points are.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. So you've obviously been doing the work for a long time. How have companies embraced the research? Because if I take the position of, let's say, the CEO of a large company with 10,000 employees, the insight is very useful to me, but it sounds like I have to do a lot of work to find the right places for people, to slot them in there, to do checkups every year and or year and a half to make sure there's a congruency between the role and what people want to do. So how has the employment sector embraced these findings?
Well, it's a very mixed kind of bag of how people are accepting
Yes.
it, particularly how major employers are. I think that employers understand fairly quickly that there is a problem. People are burning out. They're aware that it takes the edge off of the quality of some people's performance. It
Yes.
drives turnover, and so basically, however, when when they're able to hire more people, when the job market's pretty good from the employer's point of view, they're able to tolerate a fair bit of that. And so they go, okay, well, at first there's sort of the idea, well, we can tolerate this and we don't really need to do that much. We just go get some more people when these people burn out. And then when things get a little more difficult in terms of hiring, I guess there's two pieces. One is the hiring market, and secondly, there's also more and more expectation, sometimes formally from government, and sometimes more informally from the perception, how people perceive your company,
Yes.
to look like an ideal employer. You want to look like an employer where people would like to have a job, and you want a reputation as being a good place to work. And so then the next step after that is to start doing things to alleviate the distress that people feel when they're in a work situation, that a mismatch kind of situation. So there's, occupational health kinds of programs, workplace health programs at work, or things for help people outside of work with various programs to essentially alleviate the distress downstream from difficult work situations.
Yes.
It is a fairly sophisticated and more unusual, but I think becoming more evident kind of pattern where they go, oh, we've got to actually change how the work is happening. It actually is worth all that trouble. And you're right, it's a trouble to
Yes.
assess things and to make accommodations for people. Your first line managers have to have much more sophisticated skills to be able to understand the problems that some people are encountering with their management systems and be able to adapt that management system so that more people can be productive there. So, some places get to that level of sophistication. Some are just trying to do, calm things down with some workplace health resources. But there's still some that just are not paying much attention to it.
Well, maybe it's a nicer way to say it, that there's not enough pain for them yet to pay attention, but at some point they will start paying attention. And like any management idea or solution, companies are at different levels of maturity at rolling out things, and there'll always be room for improvement. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the most important thing. So I want to switch gears a little bit
Yeah.
here, right? Because clearly some
Yes.
roles are more difficult than other roles, right? So if we lay out all of the different jobs employees could do, some by their nature are just much more difficult and prone to a burnout. I'll give you an example of this. Many years ago, when I was a senior partner in strategy, I spent time with the call center team for a major bank. And I was very surprised to see the hostility that they faced from members of the bank or customers of the bank when those customers called in to have a problem fixed. And I felt that it was some cases almost abusive. So the question I have is that let's separate between roles where it's quite toxic just by the nature of the role and roles where things are a little bit better. I want to focus on those high toxic roles like dealing in call centers. How does the
Mhm.
company manage a situation where, by the nature of the role, it's going to be difficult for anyone in that role?
Right. I think there's a few steps in there. One of which I think is to one, be very straightforward with people that that's what they're getting into. Like there isn't,
Yes.
being very frank that we're hiring you to go into very difficult situations and deal with people who are in an extreme state of mind, and that's what you're getting into. Now, here's how we're going to train you to manage those situations very well and to be able to keep them contained. Here are the support systems that we're going to have for you, knowing that you've gone through a whole lot today. Here are some of the supports. Here are how many, while this maybe isn't a full 40-hour a week kind of job, maybe this is a job that you really do in a focused way for a shorter period of time. And then we have other activities, other parts of
Yes.
the job that aren't quite so demanding so that you're able to pace that out. But also to monitor and figure, well, still, we're going to deal with people in difficult situations, but there's a limit, and be able to take, support their people when they're dealing with, you know, customers, whatever, who are becoming violent or becoming particularly obnoxious, and that say no, that there is a limit to this, and we are going to take steps to assure that we're protecting our people. So I think there's a lot of things around that.
Yes.
On the other end is just saying, oh, putting people into the situation without really fully preparing them or backing them up. And I know that's when I was reading a lot of comments from a hospital survey where it was a children's hospital, and people were talking about abusive parents. The parents of children will become panicked at times when their children are in pain or their lives are being threatened. And parents can get very extreme. And what people are looking for, they understood that, but they wanted the hospital to be behind them. They wanted the support of their peers, of their managers, of the system that were really, you're with me when I'm taking on
Yes.
this difficult situation. So that was really more what they were getting across, rather than just, oh, I never want to deal with a parent who is feeling upset.
That's very interesting. So, the crux of your research is that burnout is caused by a mismatch between workers and their jobs. When you say mismatch, do you mean mismatch between expectations, skills? How do we define mismatch?
Oh, it is all those kinds of things. It's a mismatch in terms of expectations. Can be, that people are
Yes.
looking to grow their competence, that efficacy part of things, that sense of accomplishment. They have expectations there. I mean, the employer has expectations of the employee, but employees have
Yes.
expectations the other direction as well. And so, are they being met? But there's also just basic psychological needs, sort of relatedness or belonging. People want to be a valued member of a social group, and
Yes.
they're looking for that from work. And it's just about anybody is, and I that's and some people are able to establish that for themselves within their work group, and other people are run into huge difficulties getting that established within their work group, and that for any number of reasons. But basically, that's a mismatch when people are treating people with disrespect in any kind of way, and that's just sort of a basic psychological need that I see there.
Yes.
Skills as well. When people say, you know, I I'd love to be able to do this job, but I need more training, I need more knowledge, I need more access to information, some coaching in order to do that. That kind of mismatch as well. So many jobs are so complex. One of the shifts that people often make is into first line management, from just doing the work to being a manager, with very little in terms of really effective training and how to be a really good first line manager, how to be a supervisor, how to have difficult conversations with people who are encountering problems with their work. And so without training, then you're going to get that gap, and people are going to be anxious, are going to be distressed by that.
So, if I have 6 employees working in my team and they are suffering from burnout because of a mismatch between their expectations and their jobs, for one of the 6 people, it could be they have an expectation that will have more of a family environment, but it doesn't meet their needs. For another person, it could be work overload. For another, they could feel they're not being paid well. So there could be many things driving this burnout. It's not just one common thing.
Oh, that's part of why it's such a challenging and creative problem-solving process for the
Yes.
supervisor to be able to address this multifaceted part of what they're in charge of.
Yeah, because for most companies, the way they manage burnout is they'll simply pay you a bonus, or they'll offer you some reward, or they'll give you time off, but it may not be the thing that's causing your burnout. So they're not addressing the root cause. So, given how nuanced this is, assuming that these ideas were accepted in the workplace, which I'm sure they are, how do you see the balance between the employee driving this conversation versus HR or managers driving this conversation? So, who's going to be driving the process here to figure out why burnout is happening? How do you see that ideally working out?
Oh, ideally, working out would be a lot of it has to come. Some initiative has to come from the employee, because they're the one who
Yes.
employees know how they feel. Most directly, they have that information most directly. Is are they feeling that exhaustion? Are they really losing that connection with their work? So that is definitely part of the mix. But one of the barriers there is that individuals, it's difficult to trust the management environment that they're talking with. Are they actually going to help me solve this problem and resolve this and come to a happy conclusion, or am I going to be, give it a hard time because I'm
Yes.
admitting that I'm having difficulties managing all of this? So it's then again we get back into relationship dynamics and requiring a quality of trust between you know individuals and the persons to whom they're reporting. So that on a personal level is something that hopefully develops, and that the managers have the skills and experience and attitude to be able to be that
Yes.
trustworthy person for the employees. When you get into larger systems, that's where doing surveys that require that provide a certain degree of uh, confidentiality, if not anonymity, for individuals, and you can look at things on sort of the work group level. Because while within a work group, some people are doing well and some are having a more difficult time. With a large organization, one with a couple hundreds of departments or elements to it, you can do a lot of analysis on the work group level, and you can see,
Yes.
well, there are work groups where really a lot of people are having a really difficult time, and there are other work groups where it's coming out much better that way. And then you can start. You don't need to have the individual identification there. You can say, okay, those difficult places, we can see there's a lot of mismatches on control. They think they're micromanaged by someone who is really unpleasant and how they're doing
Yeah.
that micromanaging. And can we, first of all, can we do some coaching with that manager? Secondly, can we set up a process where the group can establish a more shared kind of decision making culture among themselves in terms of a team intervention? And so you're able to start developing a different kind of culture within a piece of the organization that way.
Yes, it's difficult to do, but my own experience, and I was speaking to this with your colleague Christina last week, is that I've stumbled my way into the same insight that you and Christina developed. I was working with a very talented colleague, but this person was really struggling and the motivational levels were very low. And we tried many things. We tried things like getting them more support, giving them more free time, many different things. But the thing that had the biggest impact was when we changed their roles. And the performance of this colleague improved dramatically. I remember telling Christina that this person, when we changed their roles, they were able to work so well that they raised the profit of that division by 50% by themselves. So the point I want to make here is that as the leader of that team, I could see the team wasn't doing well. So it was in my interest to fix the problem. But for many
Mhm.
managers, just like me, and leaders and executives and CEOs, we often don't know what's causing the burnout. And I had to do it through a trial and error process. But for many companies, they wouldn't do that. So the question I have is that I've never seen this definition of a burnout anywhere before. And obviously, I don't read in this space as much. But how do we get executives and managers to understand this? How do you get out the message faster? What is the process you're using for that beyond the book, which is very well written?
Oh, well, really, um, well, I talk with a lot of people, but yeah, I think it's a fundamental kind of shift in just what exactly is the role of a manager, particularly, the manager vis-a-vis the people that are, part of that individual's, work group. And
Yes.
that our world has moved, it keeps moving further and further away from a, a a hierarchical kind of structure. I mean, in a way, some people are still trying to do the hierarchical structure, and I have all the
Yes.
authority, and you do not have any authority. But that is becoming less and less relevant, and particularly if you are interested in recruiting, hiring people who are young, you're
Yeah.
going to find that a lot of them don't really jive with that kind of idea of authority anymore. It is more and more about this relationship where we have to be aware of each other's point of view in a situation, be able to get across that you've heard that other person's point of view and are
Yes.
responding to it. And I think that that's becoming more and more like that's the management model that's going to take places forward and be able to retain, develop, and make the most of this current coming in generation of people who are going to be the future for making everything work. So I think that's where I see, and that's where I get the idea that this burnout thing is really more of this existential crisis, and you learn a lot about what exactly is going on with people's
Yeah,
identity
that's right.
and sense of themselves by looking at what does burn them out, but also what is the other side of that. And as you say, some people, if you shift just the right thing, you take somebody who's really disengaged into being one of your most productive employees. But as you said, you either have to be very insightful or quite lucky to do that.
Yes. And I think one of the challenges we have in society is that when we do suffer from burnout, we assume it's a normal part of our work lives. We suffer from burnout, we got to get through it, recover a little bit, and then start increasing our workload. And we're going to suffer from burnout every now and again. And that's the way we approach burnout rather than saying that there's a burnout happening here. I need to think about why this is happening because it shouldn't be the case. And it was what you said earlier, which is very insightful. We're moving from this command and control structure to one whereby we're empowering employees more. And I think that as that transition continues to take place, companies and the way they set up their management structures would pass on more of this responsibility first to employees, but it also encourage managers to have these conversations and to think about preventing burnout in the first place versus thinking about how to survive it when it inevitably happens. Because in the field that I tend to operate in, which is private equity, financial services, management consulting, and so on, it's almost expected you will suffer from burnout. It's not seen as a negative thing. And I do know of some people who work themselves to the bone, suffer from burnout, but they carry that as a badge of honor. So, in a long way, what I'm trying to say is that we have to change what we value in employees for this to continue happening. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And they really designing work much more for people rather than hoping that people have designed themselves to fit what work expects. And so I
Yeah,
think
that's very well said.
it's
Actually, that is the problem, isn't it?
yeah.
If someone is not doing as well as they should be doing, we automatically assume it's their fault rather than saying, is this the best role for the person?
Yeah, and that it's a different way of looking at it that way is to say, okay, well, how are we going to adapt things here? And to bring the person along, it's not like you always have to go just exactly where they are. The people have to adapt and change as well. That's just part of being out there in the world. But I think that the balance has been a lot of rigidity on this side of employers, and there's only so much that people can bend themselves to fit what's expected.
Yes, I think it also has to change the way, and I'm thinking out aloud. In a way, you have to change the way companies manage almost their financial reporting. Because I'm speaking from my own experience, when we used to hire MBAs from top schools in the world to join our practice areas like corporate finance and corporate strategy and so on. And we would spend a lot of time to recruit them, which is an expensive exercise for consulting firms. We would then have to develop them and train them over a year and so on. If someone came to me and said, hey, Michael, I thought about it and I think I'm a better fit for the operations practice. So I think that I should go to the operations practice. Personally, I would take that as a sign of a lack of appreciation and I'd be quite offended by it. But if you apply the lens of what causes burnout, it would make more sense for that person to join the operations practice, stay in the business, which benefits the company overall, But because of the way our P&L is set up, we almost get punished for this. And I wonder, if that's a step company needs to take to encourage this kind of way of diagnosing what causes burnout, but also allowing a solution that benefits the company.
Right. And to getting there means one, being able to recognize the strengths in the talent that you have, and then the flexibility to be able to shift the game when it really needs to happen. And there's a lot to, because individuals are going to change. That even if the job stays the same, people are going to change, and they'll be looking for different things, different opportunities. But you've got, hopefully, if you've got a good foundation with that person working with the firm, then following that, making the most of this development as they're changing is brings a lot of value. Bringing in brand new people is important, but making the most of the folks that are connected already with you is makes a lot of financial sense.
Yes, because I've seen so many companies, when someone wants to leave a role, they take it personally rather than looking at the total cost of having this person and bringing them in and saying, okay, we've already sunk this cost. Why don't we find a way to keep them in a role that makes them happy? And I think it's a very emotional thing, and it's not something that comes natural to people. At least that's my experience. I think people do take this personally if someone wants to move. And I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of work to be done for managers and leaders to not take these things personally.
Yeah. Yeah, right. To be able to see, okay, what's really the bigger picture here in terms of the company, in terms of this individual, as well as me, and what is winning has got a different kind of idea. What is a successful outcome for this? Yeah, that takes a lot of sort of insight in order to be able to find that way, insight into yourself and your own motivations as a leader.
So your work during COVID-19, did you find that employees in general found it easier to work from home and they found working conditions better, or did you find stress levels going up?
Oh, it's a whole mix. I think it really depends on the context, the
Yeah,
type of work, all kinds of things. Like for me, working at home was great. I have a nice office. I'm just living in
yeah.
a nice small town. There's a lot of space just with my wife. My daughter at the same time was working at home, and she had a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. Had to be doing childcare and homeschooling, as well as doing her job full time in a place that had a lot less space available in a city. Very different kind of situation. Some jobs can be done just as well from home.
Yes.
Other jobs, like apparently, doing K-12 teaching, not so that didn't work so well from a
Yeah, I can
distance.
imagine.
It just wasn't. It wasn't that these teachers were not good. I mean, it was outside of their wheelhouse to teach this way, but that isn't how you engage, 7-year-olds or 10-year-olds in learning, is it, this thing. And so that kind of really discouraged. So, and then for some folks, there was a stressful beginning because it's different. Everything's different, and
Yes.
also COVID was scary. There was all kinds of things that everything in life was upset. So that was stressful in and of itself. But once people got into the groove, then it worked for folks. And really, what I've seen, most everybody who was doing it after a while thought they were even more productive than they were going into the office. And now there's this battle to try to drag people back to the office against their will.
Yes.
I think it's rather absurd, but the way some employers are managing this is rather, it's just causing a lot of difficulty. That you got enough difficulties, running
Yeah.
businesses and organizations in this day and age. You don't need to create new ones for yourself.
So when you say they're mismanaging it, you're referring to these demands that people get back into the office by the 23rd of February, working 4 days a week. If that's the case, how do you
Yeah,
think they
that
should
thing.
manage
Yeah.
it? What would be the best practice for them in managing this?
Oh, I think a collaborative process where you see, you do start interacting with people, at a distance or wherever. But basically, you're with the group as a whole, with individuals, it's saying, okay, what is the thing that works best for you, and
Yes.
make that case for me. Make a pitch that this is your best configuration. I'm going to make a pitch as the leader that I need people together some of the time. Right. I can, if you can just say, if you say I have to have everybody in the office every single day, I think that the leader has a big challenge there to say, well, why? What the heck for? you know? And to say, oh, to promote creativity and whatever. Like you said, no, that isn't how you promote creativity. Now, show
Yes.
me the data that's actually an effective way to get new ideas going. You're not every day. So I think that, and then work out. Okay, here's what we have to do for the group. We've got to have you here some of the time. That's the way it's set up. But I think leaders have to know what exactly do they want from people. I think that's a big gap. Is
Oh,
that there's a
yes, that is
lot of
true.
managers who cannot articulate what exactly do I want these people to produce. So it's just easier to see whether or not they showed up.
Well, I think what
to
you're
be
saying
found
makes a lot of
out.
sense. And you said something that I thought was quite profound. You said leaders must know what they want. So, in the examples we're
Mhm.
seeing, there are leaders who are saying that creativity is down, collaboration is down, it's affecting the company. But what they're measuring is the percentage of employees who are working in the office full time, rather than saying, hold on a second, let's measure productivity, creativity, and collaboration. And if that number is going up, it doesn't matter how many employees are in the office when we want them to be there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and put a bit more depth into what really encourages creativity and collaboration. Uh, you know, uh, the proximity is one factor, but it's only
Yes.
one factor. And it's not the constant factor. I certainly, yeah, my experience is, you need that creative work needs some deep time on one's own as well as opportunities to connect with others.
Well, my experience when I used to be a senior partner in strategies, I specialized in state owned companies, large businesses owned by governments.
Hmm.
And they always had these huge head offices, I mean, massive buildings with all the employees in there. But I would say, of all the companies I've worked with and my colleagues have worked with, not more than a handful were able to get collaboration, creativity, and productivity up because they brought people together. So, as you say, just bringing people together is not enough, because before COVID, many companies had people together, but some of them were more creative, more productive than others. So, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I think there's a missed opportunity here. When people were sent home during COVID, companies should have thought to themselves, when we bring them back, how do we bring that back in a way that works for us? And I think they missed that opportunity, because now they bring people back and they want it to be like, pre-COVID time. And I think they missed that opportunity to rethink what they really want with their employees.
Yeah, and we're not pre-COVID time. It's not over.
That is
It's
true.
an
Yes.
affecting time in
It's
so
not
many ways.
post-COVID. I mean, that's a mistake people make.
That is a mistake, and I think, yeah, there, yeah, and to be able to really understand what is to examine what was going on that was creative, that was collaborative while people were, working remotely, and appreciating that and trying to figure out how to build on that and not have this one, because it just seems too easy for the manager to just proclaim people must come back. It's just, you look like you're doing something, but you're doing nothing, and that's just simply not what's called for these days.
Well, it's also the cost, right? When you tell people to come back to work, you're basically destroying 1.5 hours of value in the morning when they prepare to go to work and they have to commute, and then in the evenings when they have to commute back
Hmm.
home. And the question you have to ask yourself is that,
Yeah.
with that value being destroyed, is it worth the benefit? And it's almost taken for granted that if employees need to be in the office, they have to figure out how to manage the commute and so on. So it comes back to something you
Hmm.
said earlier, and you said it very well. Employers need to know what they want from employees, and they have to make decisions based
Yeah.
on knowing that. There has to be a clear purpose, as opposed to simply saying, well, before we used to work together, now we're going to do it again.
Yeah. Yes.
Very good. So
Yeah.
let's switch gears a little bit
Yeah.
here. In your work, you've obviously looked at data sets from Canada, the United States, and so on. Do you find these findings apply equally around the world, or they're more relevant to certain kinds of management structures and certain kinds of cultures?
Okay. Well, the data I've spent most of my time with really pertains largely to healthcare. And with healthcare organizations, they're very similar around the world. Like what you run into a hospital, pretty much wherever you are. I mean, some are more well resourced than others, certainly that.
Yes.
But a hospital is much more like a hospital in one country or another than it is like a post office, right? It's got
Yes.
a certain quality, and that's the piece that I've really had a depth of experience with, and the basic patterns are there. Like I one thing I get, you know, I can, but something I can't go along with is people want to go, oh, I want to get the precise measure for the stresses of nurses versus accountants versus
Yes.
doctors, and I'm going, no, that's not really the important issue. The important issue is that they're having this experience of that's really a basic universal human experience of exhaustion and discouragement and losing faith in what you used to have faith in. And it isn't the precise aspects of your occupation that's really matters here. What matters is that there's this mismatch between the
Yes.
person and their basic psychological needs and what's happening in this environment. So that's what I find is is the consistent thing that goes across cultures. Like for some cultures, it's interesting with Northern European countries when they take the Maslow burnout inventory, they tend to score uh, more positively than North Americans do. And
Yes.
that's fairly consistent, not totally consistent, but fairly consistent kind of pattern. But they're just as concerned about burnout. They feel it's just like that's still a very important issue to them. And what correlates with it, what has an impact on it, are the same kinds of things. It's just that the sort of the level of how the scores come in are somewhat shaped by the environment, but the underlying dynamics of what pushes burnout and what alleviates it are really similar.
So, to paraphrase this for the listeners, some cultures may be more willing to accept this. They may have different tolerance levels for burnout. But the consistent thing is that anywhere in the world, if you find a better match between employee expectations and their jobs, it can only make things better for them.
You said that very well. Thank you. Yes,
You're most
absolutely.
welcome.
Yes.
Well, actually, when I was speaking to Christina and I speak to anyone, it's obviously a pleasure to speak to you because you know what you're talking about. But also, it's an opportunity to speak with someone who's really an expert in a field. And I always think to myself, I'm not just interviewing you, I'm getting a chance to talk to someone who really has spent their life dedicated to something. So I want to know as much as you know that I can take into my own businesses to improve them. So, I always appreciate the fact that you've dedicated your life to studying this field. You've come up with some brilliant insights. But the thing that's most interesting to me is we were talking about collaboration and creativity. You and Christina still collaborate, but you're in Canada and she's in California. Is that right?
Yes, we are 4 time zones apart, and we have been. We've been working together again since. If we're, I guess, 40 years now. We've been
40
working together,
years.
and we've written a number of books and all of this. And she's been in San Francisco, and I've been in Nova Scotia. Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that,
So we do actually get together occasionally, but
yes,
mostly we're at a huge distance. Yes.
the level of collaboration, the creativity has not dissipated because you are not spending more time together.
Oh no, no. I think no. It's really it's a matter of and what we're developing are ideas, and yeah, location, physical proximity is not the critical part of it. The communication is being able to share ideas. And again, on one's emails, it's very important to be respectful of the other person, of when they send ideas, then how you give feedback to each other, how we develop the ideas together, we go back and forth, we challenge each other, but it's a very, it's a very respectful kind of challenging because, we really see each other very well. And, writing a book with somebody, it's a big deal, and we've written a few of them together, and it always works out well that way, and it's always strengthens our relationship doing that. So it's creativity. It can we have the mediums to make all this happen in terms of communication. I mean,
Yes.
it's just amazing what we have for all of this. I mean, with Google Docs, like you're working on the same document or something, all these kinds of things that you can do now, which really developed over these previous decades, have been so. The need to have everybody in the same room is really, it's really overblown.
Yeah. It's more about having everyone on the same page, pursuing the same purpose, rather than having everyone in the
Hmm.
same room. And it's a good example of this because we talked about how employers are pushing employees back to come in by a certain time. But as your own experience shows that you don't need to do those things to get the best out of people. So, Michael, I want to thank you
Yeah.
for a very, very interesting conversation. Probably one of the most interesting
Okay.
conversations I've had.
Oh, well, I thank you for those kind words, but also for this interesting conversation because I likewise, I really enjoyed talking with you, and yeah, hope we can stay in touch.
The thing about strategy I notice in leadership and business is that there's often just a few ideas that have an outsized impact on your business. It's not about knowing every concept in business, it's about finding those few that have unusual amount of leverage. And this interpretation and definition of burnout I find to be quite useful. And I think that if managers could internalize this, they can have quite a big impact in terms of how they created value, but also that have more empowered and motivated employees. So I want to thank you for this, Michael. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I wish you well.
You as well. I'm sure we'll have you back on the show talking about your new research soon. Take care, Michael.
Okay. Okay. Bye bye.